Hi, this is Laurie Niles with Violinist.com, and I'm here with violinist Jennifer Koh, and she is performing this season with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, and she'll be doing the world premiere of the violin concerto called Traces by Nina Young. It's great to see you, Jennifer.
It's great to see you.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, first of all, how did you come to the violin? I heard that you started in the Suzuki method.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but my parents were both refugees during the Korean War. So they spent their childhood actually kind of heading south. My mom walked all the way from North Korea essentially to Busan, which was the only area that ended up not being held by the Americans. They didn't have any opportunities. Even things like consistent school, much less like music lessons or swimming or anything like that. So I think when they came here, they wanted me to have everything they didn't have. And when I say everything, I mean like everything. It was like swimming, diving, gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, ice skating, and violin happened to be one of them. It was like the only opening at the local Suzuki school. So they were like, whatever, sure, violin. So that's how I started. But I had this amazing first Suzuki teacher, Mrs. Jo Davis. She's wonderful. Actually, we just celebrated her 90th birthday. And what I realized, it was like basically just only family. But what I realized was, oh, I started studying with her at 3, so I know all of her kids. I know what they're doing. I know all of her grandkids and what they do. I know her great-grandkids. And I was like, oh, I guess it is because I've known her almost all my life.
You kind of are family.
Yeah. So that's really great. But it's only because of her that I think I ended up going into music, because she told my parents that I had some kind of talent. I mean, the funny thing though is, recently I moved my parents to New York. Yes. And so I was going through like all of the stuff in the basement that you find like over like the 40 years they've lived there. And I found this videotape, like an old one, and I had everything digitized. And I remembered I looked at that clip and I was like, God, that sounds terrible. Who is that person playing? And it was me when I was like 7 or 8. And I called Mrs. Davis and I was like, why on earth did you think I was talented at all? That sounded horrible. But in any case, she was encouraging.
She was right, too. She was right.
She said, oh, it's just because you didn't see yourself in lessons. And I was like, I don't know, that sounded pretty bad. So she found my next violin teacher. She advocated for me to actually change teachers. And my parents both worked full time. So she actually drove me an hour each way for a year.
She drove you herself, your violin
and
teacher.
She attended the lessons, and then she took notes, and then she practiced with me.
Oh my goodness.
To make sure that I was like learning everything.
Wow.
I think what that taught me was that our choices in life really have the potential to change somebody's life. And that was a gift she gave me. So I feel like the only way I could ever repay that is to do the same sorts of things.
You know, it makes me think of your project Alone Together. Can you describe that a little bit? It was during a time, this happened during the pandemic, and it was during a time when nobody, including composers, had work. Soloists didn't have work. What was your feeling behind that?
You know, the pandemic broke out, and then there were these shelter-in-place orders, and I remembered, actually, she just got the MacArthur. My last concert, right before the, pandemic kind of took over, was the world premiere of Courtney Bryan's Violin Concerto. And then I came back to New York, and every half hour, every single concert was canceling. And I was in close touch with Nina Young, and then also Missy Mazzoli. And of course, the first reaction, especially with both Missy and I, was panic, because we lost all of our work. you know, I realized actually, you know, we're lucky. We didn't actually 100% lose the work. Our work was postponed because we're in a certain point where things weren't just purely canceling. And then I remember thinking back and when I first left school, and it's so hard to go into music, and it's really tough financially. But on top of that, even artistically, you start learning, you know, from experiences from other musicians. And I realized actually it's way worse for the younger generation, not only in terms of finances, which is hard, and then put a pandemic on top of that, which just makes it 100% harder. But then also in terms of loss of experience. For some people, it was like they weren't going to have their first string quartet premiered, so they wouldn't have that experience. Their first orchestral piece was like canceled. So it was also about trying to bring exposure to these younger composers. But essentially, the whole process was about doing micro commissions. So 30-second pieces written for solo violin. And I went to my friends and colleagues who had kind of institutional support or full-time salaried positions and asked them to identify a younger freelance composer that they believed in or felt kind of musically connected to. At that time, they donated their work, and then I commissioned the younger composer. But actually what makes me the happiest is like when they've come to me and told me, oh, this person heard my piece on the series during the pandemic, and they commissioned me after. And that's actually, for me, that was the most satisfying.
So your choice to do these small commissions turned into some more commissions for these composers and helped them on their way, kind of like your teacher helped you.
Oh, Mrs. Davis. I mean, I have so many people that helped me along the way. So I still feel like there's so many people I have to thank, including my last teacher, Jamie Laredo. So I feel like I'm not thanking everybody. Felix Gallimere, I'm gonna just start making a whole list. Oh, I know Mr. Steinhardt has been here in California, and he was a really great mentor as well. You know, it reminds me a lot that we have a responsibility. Every single thing we do is a decision, and it's a choice, and then that becomes a habit, and then that becomes a whole lifestyle of how we live. And so every small decision we make, we have to recognize that that's a choice. And either it's about fulfilling something that's not only about yourself, that's greater than yourself, that's more like a life mission, versus just yourself improving. Of course, we want to be better, and of course it's my goal to be the best kind of musician that I can be and the best violinist that I can be. But much beyond that, it's what do you leave behind? What are you doing for other people? That I think is much more important and much more significant, and in the long run makes a far larger impact in terms of building the world that you want also.
Well, and this week you're going to be premiering Nina Young's Violin Concerto, Traces. Can you tell me a little bit about how you met Nina Young, and then a little bit about the concerto itself?
So with Nina, actually, it was funny because a lot of my friends were like, oh, there's like this composer, Nina, that lives in your building. And I just hadn't met her in person, but I met all these people that had been staying in her apartment at different times.
This is in New York City.
Yeah, this is in New York. And I think actually I ended up meeting her. I went to hear a concert by ACO, American Composers Orchestra, and one of her pieces was being premiered there, and I was so impressed. And then I think actually, when I thought about it after you and I spoke, I think the way I actually met her was I was doing a rehearsal, and she came to that rehearsal, and I think that's how we briefly met. And then eventually, our friends, mutual friends, introduced us for kind of like more in-depth introduction, I guess.
And then what led to the commission of a violin concerto? That's pretty major. And as I understand, she's a violinist herself. And so and it's her first violin concerto, right? So this is a big deal for her.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember. It usually happens quite organically. So, so I was, after that concert, I was looking at more of her music, not only just for solo violin, but in general. And there was a piano quartet that I really loved called Spero Lucha. So I started playing that. There were several other pieces for violin and electronics that I started performing with her, actually. And then it just felt like a natural thing to ask her to write a concerto because I loved her musical language. She's so unique, imaginative. I think the coloration, the lyricism is very unique to her. And then the fun part, I mean, honestly, in a lot of ways, this is like the most technically challenging, but it's kind of actually fun because she is a violinist, there are things like running thirds and tenths and stuff, which usually, like nowadays, people don't really write so much. So but she knows how to write it for violin, which is like, in terms of even, it's hard to describe like patterns and stuff. And I remembered I told her like during the pandemic, I don't know, on a personal level, I was like, oh, I should just go through all the Pagani caprices again. I'm just gonna go through all of the like Carl Flesch scales, and I don't know, so maybe that got like planted in her head a little bit, and that's where these different sections came in. But I don't know that the audience would necessarily like notice it. It was more like on a violinistic level. It was fun for me to see.
It has like violin in jokes, this concerto,
I don't know if it's
maybe.
jokes as much as like just
references.
Maybe references?
Traces, I guess.
Yeah.
But you started, this whole thing started before the pandemic, and then tell me a little bit about like how your relationship, you guys were both in the same apartment complex, alone during a pandemic.
I mean, I have to say it was terrifying. In March and April of 2020, I think both she and I were experiencing it literally like 5 floors apart. And because at that time, New York City was so being really devastated by the pandemic in terms of literally human loss of life. It was terrifying. We didn't even leave our apartments. I think, or I know that neither of us interacted with another human being for 6.5 weeks.
That is a really long time.
And I think we just, or at least I can say I started losing it. There is something that I posted on Instagram, but I think most people haven't seen it. And I had considered like removing it because it kind of shows like how crazy and intense and like it had gotten like for both she and I. Yeah, so if you see that, you can kind of see like where psychologically we were unraveling.
So you were psychologically unraveling, and you reached out to each other, it sounds like.
Yes, but it was kind of amazing because human beings really are social animals. Because when we decided to pod together, so when we finally did meet up, it was like, I could literally feel like a chemical start to flow through my body.
Wow. And
she did as well.
So for a while then, it was just you in a pod together. How long was that?
You know, we didn't have things like masks. And New York is such a concentrated area of human beings. Yeah. So like even walking into hallways, all of that is so kind of tight that it was still quite scary for a long time. And eventually, I think once masks happened, or we were able to access them, and once we learned kind of how it was spread, then we started doing more things outside. We did things like I would never normally do. Like, well, I mean, I did it as a student, but we started biking outside. And then I remembered the moment that like, you know, at that time it was like video concerts.
Yes.
So the first time I got like a video concert where I actually could have income, I was like, okay, biking done. But for a while we were like going down like the Hudson Greenway on bicycles.
Well, so how do you feel about having this violin concerto come to life with LACO?
Oh, I love LACO. I mean, I love the individuals, I love the orchestra, I love the individual musicians in the orchestra. First of all, they're great musicians, but second of all, they are such dedicated musicians to serve the music.
Yeah.
And that is something that I just admire so much. I remembered actually Margaret, I think this was before we did the Ligeti violin concerto, I think she actually called me and she was like, don't you think we need extra rehearsal? And I was like, yes, I think we need extra rehearsal.
So the concertmaster doesn't always call you to talk about stuff like that?
Well, to actually request more rehearsals, yeah. not always, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you know, what's the difference between sort of playing with a chamber orchestra and a full orchestra? It's a sort of a different feel?
I tend to see like kind of music as a whole. It's whether it's a chamber orchestra or a large orchestra or somebody that's like in a quote unquote different genre, I kind of see it all the same. It's like great musicians, bad musicians, good musicians, you know, like it's great artists, bad artists. So of course it just depends on the ensemble. One thing I can say about LACO is that they're really a group of excellent musicians. And they have the kind of flexibility of playing, of course, both chamber music, I think solo things, as well as orchestral things. And you can really feel it when you play with them.
When it comes to a brand new piece like this one, I mean, you're someone who does this all the time. How many commissions have you done? Or, you know, how many pieces have you premiered? Or do you have
I think it's over 100, actually, at this point.
Lot.
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, even we haven't gone into rehearsal yet for Nina's piece, but I was trying to think about it, and I realized, you know, the fun part is that you're walking into a situation where everything is possible. So I can look at a score and I can be like, okay, I think I'm going to hear the vibraphones here, and I'm pretty sure I can hear the harp here. I'm pretty sure I'll hear the entrance of the piccolo. But sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah.
And so what I really enjoy is not only the discovery of the piece coming together and how it breathes and how it even acoustically, because always the acoustic aspect of it, the physicality of it, once it comes out of your head into physical bodies, is really fascinating to me. I think for the composer as well, because of course it's been in their minds, and then for me it's been in my mind for a long time. So then to actually have it physicalized is an amazing thing. And then what I love, which we have to do as musicians anyhow, is that kind of very quick transitions and listening and responding to that. If we're doing the Brahms concerto and let's say the oboist takes a little bit of time, extra time here or there, then you adjust to it in the moment, right?
Yeah. And
And here it's expected that everybody does that. Not expected, but the best experiences happen when everybody is adjusting to what the music sounds like. And so in a way, sometimes I feel like premieres are the ideal way of making music, and that experience is something that we should bring to every other piece that we do. It's this sense of discovery, it's the sense of limitless possibilities and decisions, musical decisions, and very quick adjustments and really needing to listen to each other. Mm-hmm. So that's why I enjoy doing new music, because those are the things that I can bring back to older music. And actually, with older music, at least for me, I feel like the most important thing is to look at it like it's new. So even for me, like with violin parts or scores, I I will get new scores and new parts every time, because I don't want to just go into the habit, oh, I've always done this fingering. Oh, I've always taken time here. Oh, I've always, you know, this is what's comfortable. This is what I've always done. So that's kind of how I approach older music as well. But then that does mean sometimes I'm not, the performance style doesn't necessarily go exactly with traditional performance practice. Like, I'm certainly aware of that because I've come from such a traditional background, you know, like Curtis and Marlborough Music Festival. What's fun for me is to be able to like really look at the score and make decisions from that, and not necessarily from all of the performance practices that have happened before.
So you literally get a clean slate, a new version of the music, and start over again.
I mean, so that was like why I mean, I feel like every project I do is basically reflective of a reflection of like my own thinking process. So that was one of the reasons I did 2x4, which was a project that I premiered here with LACO, actually. And that was with my teacher, Jamie Loreto, and it was for double violin concerti. And that was really about engaging with that question of what performance practices do we inherit and decide to take? How do we change? And so Jamie was a great teacher, but he and I do play differently.
Yeah.
The great thing about him is he, as a teacher, he really encourages you to find your own voice, and he does not discourage that. So you do see how things shift and change. Having studied with him, I also realized that it is important that you find your own voice, and that it is okay. It's not about copying what had come before.
Do you remember the first time you ever did like a piece of new music where you were just, that was it, you know, you had to figure out what to do with it?
I think the first time I did, of course I had done new music, like, because I studied with Felix Gallimere. So anyhow, it felt weird because, like, you know, I think by the time I was 18, I'd gone through learning probably all of the standard repertoire, right? And by that point, I was moving into Baird Concerto, Bartók Concerti. So it just felt weird. Why would I stop learning repertoire at a certain age? It was like, why that just seemed so strange to me. But it was, I do remember actually specifically that the John Zorn Concerto was the first piece that was like literally a couple months old when I first performed it, and that was working with a composer that I didn't know. I had recorded Giancarlo Menotti's Violin Concerto, but I had known him as a person for years from Spoleto Music Festival, and I remember being very, very scared about it. But now when I look back, I realize every single thing that I was scared about doing was an incredibly important thing that I did. So that was the first kind of concerto, and that was, I think, really the first, and I was terrified of doing it.
Yeah, what were you scared about?
First of all, it was hard. Second of all, it was, you know, really having to make every single decision and finding strategies, even in so far as like fingerings. Like a lot of his stuff is super high and it's moving up and down. Yeah, so that was scary. And then making all of these purely musical decisions with absolutely no performance tradition from before. But then that kind of started once I got through the fear, that's kind of what started my kind of love of that process.
I mean, now you've done it 100 times.
Yeah, but then I remembered the other thing that was terrifying to me was performing solo Bach in public. But having done that was one of the most satisfying and important things I've done, I think. Playing Einstein was one of the most terrifying things for me, but that led to one of the most artistically satisfying and, I think, significant things in my lifetime, which was actually then became a combination of working with both Robert Wilson and Lucinda Childs to do all 6 sonatas and partitas staged and choreographed. So all of the things I've been terrified of actually have led to incredibly meaningful, important things in my life. So in other words, everybody should do what they're terrified of. And don't be afraid of failure. Like, it's okay to fail. It's really about how you pick yourself up after that. And it doesn't kill you. It really doesn't. It might feel really bad for a while, but it does not kill you.
So you live in New York City. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about LA?
Actually, I know, like, there seems to be this weird East Coast, West Coast rivalry. I don't quite get it, because I love Los Angeles. It's so
I love New York.
Different from New York. And actually, every time I'm here, and I think a lot of the most recent times I've been here have actually been with LACO, and every time I come here, I'm like, I should really live in Los Angeles.
Why does a little part of you at least want to live in Los Angeles?
It's not a little part, is the thing. It's not a little part. It's like a very different, I think, kind of philosophy of living. New York is so densely populated, and it's like a very direct city in the sense that everything's like moving very quickly, all like in this direction, and if it's clashing, everybody's still moving in their directions. But LA, there's a kind of freedom, because I think maybe even because of the landscape in a way. There's a kind of more experimental freedom. New York does have that kind of experimentalism, but it's a different kind, and it's a different language. Even though I've argued with people about this, but I think I have to admit that LA has the best Korean food.
Outside of Korea.
Yeah, and the Korean food is better than New York. I'm so sorry, New York and New Jersey, but I think it's absolutely true. And it does make me sad, because I would like to say that New York and New Jersey has the best Korean food, but it's not. It's in Los Angeles. Yeah, and then I think it's just I have so many friends here that it's also, I feel really drawn to the city. Maybe I should just split my time. I feel like I should split my time between New York, LA, and then Hawaii for surfing. But I could also surf in LA, so.
You could.
Right? And maybe not as much as in Hawaii, so. Maybe the three places together.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us all about your projects and your collaboration with LACO.
How do I make a heart? Does this work? Yes. Thank you, LACO. Thank you, LA. I feel like it looks like misshapen. Is it okay?